Marcus Reed wiped the grease from his hands on the old rag hanging from his belt as he stared at the official notice glowing on his workstation screen. The words seemed unreal even after reading them 3 times. His Uncle Jake was dead and had left him everything in his research lab on the far side of Port Haven Station. Marcus had not seen Uncle Jake in 5 years, but he remembered the old man well. Jake was always talking about strange creatures from other worlds and dimensions that most people thought were just stories. Other family members called Jake crazy, but Marcus had always found his uncle's tales fascinating even if he never quite believed them. The notification said Marcus needed to come to Processing Center 7 to claim his inheritance within 48 hours or it would be sold to cover storage fees. Marcus looked around his small repair shop filled with broken ship parts and half-finished projects. He could barely afford to keep this place running, let alone pay for storage of whatever weird stuff Jake had collected over the years. Still, something pulled at him to go see what his uncle had left behind. Maybe there would be something valuable he could sell to keep his shop open for another few months. Marcus locked up his tools and headed across the station through the maze of corridors that connected the various sections of Port Haven. Processing Center 7 was in the science district where most of the researchers and xenobiologists worked. Marcus felt out of place walking through the clean white halls in his stained work clothes. He was used to the industrial sections where everything was metal and grease and the constant hum of machinery. The processing center clerk was a thin alien with blue skin who looked at Marcus like he was some kind of pest. The clerk handed him a data pad with forms to fill out and pointed to a waiting area. After an hour of paperwork, Marcus was finally given a key card and directions to Storage Unit 427. The storage unit was larger than Marcus had expected. As he stepped inside, the lights came on automatically, revealing a space packed with strange equipment and containers. There were microscopes that looked nothing like any Marcus had seen before and machines with displays, showing symbols he could not read. Glass tanks lined one wall filled with preserved specimens floating in different colored liquids. Marcus moved carefully through the maze of equipment, looking for anything that might be worth selling. Most of it looked too specialized and weird to interest normal buyers. He was about to give up when he heard a soft whimpering sound coming from the back corner of the unit. Behind a stack of research journals, Marcus found a small cage about the size of a dog carrier. Inside was what looked like a tiny wolf, but unlike any animal Marcus had ever seen. The creature was no bigger than a house cat with fur that should have been silver and white, but was now patchy and dull. Dark spots covered its skin where the fur had fallen out, and its breathing was shallow and labored. The creature looked up at Marcus with large eyes that seemed to hold intelligence far beyond what any normal animal should possess. Those eyes were the most striking thing about the creature, because they still held tiny points of light, like distant stars, even though the rest of it looked half dead. Marcus found a note taped to the top of the cage written in his uncle's handwriting. The note said the creature was called a Starlight wolf from something called the Nebula Realm. According to the note, it was dying from parasites that were eating it from the inside out. Jake had tried everything he could think of, but nothing worked. The note went on to explain that Starlight wolves normally lived in the space between stars, feeding on cosmic radiation and stellar winds. This one was just a pup that had somehow gotten infected with parasites from another dimension during one of Jake's research expeditions. The local veterinarians had given up on it weeks ago. Marcus knelt down beside the cage and looked more closely at the dying creature. He could see tiny movements under its skin like something was crawling around inside. The poor thing was clearly suffering and probably did not have much time left. He should have just left it there and walked away. Marcus was a mechanic, not a veterinarian, and he knew nothing about taking care of alien animals, let alone one that was supposed to come from another dimension. But something about those star-filled eyes made him unable to just abandon the creature. Marcus carefully picked up the cage and carried it out of the storage unit. He would take it back to his shop and at least try to make it comfortable for whatever time it had left. If nothing else, he could make sure it did not die alone in that cold storage room. The trip back across the station with the cage was awkward and drew stares from other people in the corridors. Marcus ignored them and focused on keeping the cage steady, so he would not jostle the sick creature inside. Back in his shop, Marcus set the cage down on his workbench and opened it carefully. The Starlight wolf did not try to run or bite him when he reached inside. It just lay there breathing weakly as Marcus gently lifted it out and placed it on a soft cloth. Up close, Marcus could see the parasites more clearly. They looked like tiny silver worms that moved just under the surface of the creature's skin. There had to be thousands of them, maybe millions, all feeding on whatever energy the wolf normally used to stay alive. Marcus had no idea what to do for a creature like this, but his mechanical mind started working on the problem anyway. The parasites looked almost like contaminants in a fuel system. They were clearly taking in energy from the wolf and processing it for their own use before expelling waste products. He spent the next few hours reading through his uncle's research notes on his data pad. Most of it was over his head, but he began to understand that Starlight wolves were essentially living energy collectors. They absorbed cosmic radiation through their fur and converted it into a form of energy their bodies could use. The parasites had somehow learned to tap into that energy conversion process. They were literally stealing the wolf's food before it could be processed and used. Without that energy, the creature was slowly starving to death no matter how much regular food anyone tried to give it. Marcus looked at the dying wolf lying on his workbench and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He was going to try to save it even if he had no idea how. After all, he had fixed plenty of impossible things before, and this was just another broken system that needed repair. The creature seemed to sense his determination because those star-filled eyes focused on him with what looked almost like hope. Marcus reached out carefully and touched the wolf's head with one finger. The fur felt strange, like it was made of silk and starlight mixed together. He had 47 days of supplies in his shop and enough scrap materials to build almost anything if he could figure out what needed to be built. The other mechanics on the station would think he had lost his mind trying to cure an alien animal with spare ship parts, but Marcus had never been one to do things the normal way. The Starlight wolf closed its eyes as Marcus began gathering tools and materials. For the first time since he had found it, the creature's breathing seemed a little steadier, as if it somehow knew that someone was finally going to fight for its life. Marcus spent the first 3 days just watching the Starlight wolf and trying to understand how the parasites worked. He set up a small area in the corner of his shop with soft blankets and a heat lamp where the creature could rest while he studied it. The wolf was too weak to move much, but its eyes followed Marcus everywhere he went. Using a magnifying lens with precision work, Kit Marcus could see the parasites moving under the wolf's skin like tiny machines. They seemed to have a pattern to their movement, and Marcus realized they were not just random creatures eating whatever they could find. These things were organized and purposeful in how they attacked their host. Marcus had always been good at fixing things because he could see how systems work together. When a ship's engine failed, he did not just replace parts randomly. He traced the problem back to its source and figured out why the system was breaking down. Now he was looking at the Starlight wolf the same way he would look at a contaminated fuel system. The parasites had what looked like intake ports on their front ends where they absorbed energy from the wolf. The energy passed through their bodies and came out as waste through ports on their back ends. Just like a fuel processor that took in raw materials and expelled refined products and waste. Marcus spent hours reading his uncle's research notes and cross-referencing them with mechanical engineering principles he had learned over the years. The more he studied, the more convinced he became that these parasites were operating like microscopic machines rather than normal biological creatures. On the 4th day, Marcus made his first attempt at treatment. He had noticed that the parasites seemed to slow down when the wolf was kept warm, but became more active when the temperature dropped. Using a modified thermal regulator from a ship's climate control system, Marcus created a device that could heat specific areas of the wolf's body to different temperatures. He started with the wolf's front legs where the parasite concentration seemed lowest. Marcus carefully applied controlled heat to small sections of skin while monitoring the parasites through his magnifying equipment. At exactly 42 degrees, the parasites in the heated area stopped moving and seemed to go dormant. The wolf opened its star-filled eyes and looked at Marcus with what seemed like surprise. For the first time since he had found the creature, it lifted its head slightly and made a soft sound that was almost like a purr. Marcus felt a surge of hope and continued the heat treatment on other areas of the wolf's body. By the end of the day, Marcus had managed to slow down about 20% of the parasites using controlled heating. It was not a cure, but it was progress, and the wolf seemed noticeably more alert. Marcus named the creature Comet because of the way its eyes sparkled like stars even when it was sick. The next morning, Marcus found that some of the dormant parasites had become active again during the night. The heat treatment was temporary, but it proved that the parasites could be affected by changes in their environment. Marcus began thinking about other ways to disrupt their feeding process. He remembered working on a ship that had problems with microscopic contaminants in its fuel lines. The solution had been to install electromagnetic pulse generators that disrupted the contaminants without damaging the ship's systems. Marcus wondered if something similar might work on the parasites. Using components from old scanner arrays and power regulators, Marcus built a device that could generate very weak electromagnetic pulses. The device was small enough to hold in his hand and could be adjusted to different frequencies and intensities. Marcus tested it on a small area of Comet's back leg, where he could see several parasites moving under the skin. The first few frequencies had no effect, but when Marcus reached a specific wavelength, the parasites suddenly stopped moving. Under the magnifying lens, he could see them twitching, as if they were being disrupted by the electromagnetic field. After 30 seconds of exposure, the parasites in the treated area seemed confused and began moving in random directions instead of their usual organized patterns. Comet made another soft purring sound and actually tried to stand up for the first time since Marcus had found him. The wolf was still too weak to stay upright for long, but the improvement was obvious. Marcus felt like he was finally on the right track. Over the next week, Marcus refined his electromagnetic pulse treatment and combined it with a heat therapy. He discovered that heating an area first made the parasites more vulnerable to the electromagnetic disruption. Working slowly and carefully, he began treating larger sections of Comet's body. The other mechanics at Port Haven thought Marcus had lost his mind when they saw him working on what they assumed was just a sick animal. Tom Bradley, who ran the shop next to Marcus's, came by one evening and found Marcus hunched over Comet with his homemade medical devices. Tom shook his head and said Marcus was wasting time and money on a creature that was obviously dying. He pointed out that there were paying customers waiting for ship repairs while Marcus played veterinarian with alien pets. Marcus just smiled and continued his work, knowing that Tom would never understand. Dr. Lisa Park from the Xenobiology lab had heard about Marcus's attempts to treat the Starlight wolf and came to see what he was doing. She was a serious woman with advanced degrees in alien biology who had studied hundreds of different species from across the galaxy. When she saw Marcus's crude equipment and improvised treatment methods, she almost laughed. Dr. Park explained that the parasites were from a completely different dimension and operated on principles that human science barely understood. She had tried every advanced treatment available, including experimental drugs and energy therapies that cost more than Marcus made in a year. Nothing had worked, and she was certain that nothing would work. Marcus listened politely to Dr. Park's explanation, but continued his treatments anyway. He had noticed that the parasites seemed to have weak spots where their intake and output ports were located. Using a modified micro-welder, he had been experimenting with ways to seal off these ports without damaging the surrounding tissue. The technique required incredible precision and steady hands, but Marcus had been doing detailed mechanical work for 15 years. He could solder connections smaller than a human hair and repair circuits that other mechanics could not even see properly. Working on microscopic parasites was just an extension of skills he already possessed. By the end of the second week, Comet was able to stand and walk short distances around Marcus's shop. The wolf's fur was starting to show patches of its original silver color, and the star-like sparkles in its eyes were becoming brighter. Marcus had successfully eliminated about 60% of the parasites using his combination of heat therapy, electromagnetic pulses, and microsurgery. Dr. Park returned to check on their progress and was shocked by the improvement. She ran several scans on Comet using portable equipment and confirmed that the parasite population had been dramatically reduced. When she asked Marcus to explain his methods, he showed her the simple devices he had built from ship parts and scrap materials. The xenobiologist stared at Marcus's equipment in disbelief. She had spent years trying to solve this problem using the most advanced technology available, while a simple mechanic had succeeded with tools that looked like they belonged in a junkyard. Dr. Park asked to document Marcus's techniques for her research, but he was more interested in finishing the treatment than writing scientific papers. Marcus knew he was close to a complete solution, but the remaining parasites were the strongest and most deeply embedded ones. They had survived his initial treatments and seemed to be adapting to his methods. He needed to find a way to flush them out of Comet's system entirely rather than just killing them one by one. The answer came to him while he was working on a ship's water recycling system that had been contaminated with mineral deposits. The ship's engineer had tried chemical treatments to dissolve the deposits, but they kept reforming in different areas. Marcus had solved the problem by creating a complete system flush that removed all contaminants, at once using a combination of filtration and electromagnetic separation. If he could adapt the same principle to work on a living creature, he might be able to remove the remaining parasites from Comet's body in a single treatment. Marcus began designing what he thought of as a biological filtration system that would work with a wolf's natural energy processing instead of fighting against it. Comet seemed to sense that something important was about to happen because the wolf stayed close to Marcus while he worked on the new device. Those intelligent star-filled eyes watched every move Marcus made, as if the creature understood that its life depended on whatever the human mechanic was building. Marcus worked for 3 straight days building what he called his biological filtration system. The device looked like a metal vest that could wrap around Comet's torso with thin tubes, and wires connecting to a control unit about the size of a toolbox. Inside the control unit, Marcus had installed modified ship components, including a microprocessor from a navigation computer and electromagnetic field generators from a cargo scanner. The system worked on the principle of creating controlled energy flows through Comet's body that would attract the remaining parasites to specific collection points where they could be extracted. Marcus had studied how the wolf's natural energy absorption worked and designed his device to enhance that process rather than interfere with it. Comet seemed to understand that this treatment was different from the others. The wolf sat very still while Marcus fitted the vest around his body and connected all the tubes and monitoring cables. Those star-filled eyes watched Marcus with complete trust, as if the creature knew that everything depended on this final attempt. When Marcus activated the system, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Comet's fur began to glow with a soft silver light that pulsed in rhythm with the device's electromagnetic fields. The wolf's eyes brightened until they looked like tiny galaxies spinning in his head. Marcus watched his monitoring screens as the device began drawing parasites toward the collection points. The process took 4 hours, during which Marcus barely moved from his position at the control unit. He had to constantly adjust the electromagnetic fields to prevent the parasites from adapting to the treatment. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he worked the controls like a pilot navigating through an asteroid field. Comet remained calm throughout the entire procedure, even though Marcus knew it must have been uncomfortable. The wolf occasionally made soft sounds that seemed more like encouragement than complaints. By the end of the 4th hour, the collection chambers were full of writhing silver parasites, and Comet's vital signs were stronger than they had been since Marcus first found him. When Marcus finally shut down the system and removed the vest, Comet stood up and shook himself like a normal dog. But there was nothing normal about what happened next. The wolf's fur exploded into brilliant silver and white light that filled the entire shop. Patterns that looked like flowing nebulae rippled across his coat, and his eyes blazed like miniature stars. Marcus stepped back in amazement as Comet began to grow. The creature had been the size of a small dog, but now he expanded until he was as large as a wolf should be. His fur settled into a beautiful silver and white pattern that seemed to contain actual starlight woven into every strand. Comet looked at Marcus, and suddenly the mechanic heard a voice in his head. The voice was warm and grateful and spoke in perfect human language, even though the wolf's mouth never moved. Comet was thanking Marcus for saving his life and explaining that he could now communicate telepathically because his natural abilities had been restored. Marcus sat down heavily on his workbench, trying to process what had just happened. His uncle's notes had mentioned that starlight wolves were intelligent, but Marcus had not expected anything like this. Comet explained that his species normally lived in the empty spaces between stars where they fed on cosmic radiation and solar winds. The wolf told Marcus that the parasites had come from a hostile dimension where creatures existed by draining energy from other worlds. These parasites were not just random infections, but weapons designed to weaken dimensional barriers by killing the creatures that guarded them. Comet's pack had been defending an important dimensional crossing when they were attacked. Most of Comet's family had been killed in the battle, and he had been badly injured when Uncle Jake found him during one of his research expeditions. Jake had tried to save Comet, but the old scientists lacked the mechanical thinking needed to treat the parasites as the machines they really were. Word of Marcus's success spread quickly through Port Haven Station. Within days, scientists and researchers from across the galaxy were asking to examine Comet and learn about Marcus's treatment methods. Dr. Park returned with a team of xenobiologists who wanted to document everything Marcus had done. The scientists were baffled by Marcus's approach. They had been thinking of the parasites as biological organisms and trying to treat them with medicine and surgery. Marcus had treated them as mechanical contaminants and used engineering solutions instead of medical ones. His success challenged everything they thought they knew about interdimensional biology. Representatives from the Galactic Science Council arrived at Port Haven, offering Marcus huge amounts of money for Comet and his research data. They wanted to take both the wolf and the mechanic to their research facilities where teams of experts could study Marcus's methods and apply them to other cases. Marcus refused all their offers. Comet was not for sale, and Marcus had no intention of leaving his simple life to become some kind of celebrity scientist. The wolf supported Marcus's decision, explaining telepathically that he had bonded with a human and would not be separated from him. The scientists tried to convince Marcus that he had a responsibility to share his discoveries with the galaxy. They pointed out that there might be other infected Starlight wolves out there who could be saved using his methods. Marcus listened to their arguments, but remained firm in his refusal to leave Port Haven. Comet solved the problem by demonstrating abilities that none of the scientists had expected. The wolf began to glow with internal light, and suddenly a small opening appeared in the air beside him. Through the opening, Marcus could see stars and swirling clouds of cosmic dust. Comet had opened a tiny wormhole, leading to somewhere in deep space. The assembled scientists gasped in amazement as Comet explained that fully healthy Starlight wolves could manipulate space and time on a limited scale. This was how they traveled between dimensional barriers, and why they were so important as guardians. The parasites had not just been trying to kill Comet, but to prevent him from using these abilities. Marcus stared through the wormhole at the incredible vista of space beyond. He had spent his whole life fixing machines and dreaming about traveling to distant worlds, but never imagining it might actually be possible. Comet asked if Marcus would like to see where Starlight wolves came from and what they were protecting. The wolf explained that there were other infected members of his species scattered across different dimensions. They were all dying slowly from parasitic weapons deployed by the hostile entities that wanted to collapse the barriers between worlds. Marcus's mechanical approach could save them, but it would require traveling to places where normal spaceships could not go. Dr. Park and her team tried to convince Marcus to let them come along on any dimensional travels. They argued that trained scientists would be better equipped to handle the dangers of interdimensional exploration than a simple mechanic. Marcus almost laughed at the suggestion given how wrong their scientific expertise had been about treating Comet. Comet closed the wormhole and looked at Marcus with those galaxy-filled eyes. The wolf explained that the choice was entirely up to human, but that time was running out for the other infected wolves. Each day they waited meant that more guardians would die and the dimensional barriers would become weaker. Marcus thought about his quiet life as a mechanic fixing broken ships and earning just enough money to keep his shop running. Then he looked at Comet, whose very existence proved that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than he had ever imagined. The wolf had trusted Marcus with his life, and now Marcus had to decide if he was ready to trust Comet with his. The other scientists continued to argue and make offers, but Marcus was no longer listening to them. He was thinking about all the broken things he had fixed over the years and realizing that maybe his real purpose had always been to fix things that everyone else thought were impossible to repair. Comet seemed to sense Marcus's decision before the human had fully made it himself. The wolf's tail began to wag slowly and his star-filled eyes sparkled with anticipation. Marcus realized that his life had just changed forever and that there was no going back to the simple existence he had known before. Marcus stood up and walked over to his tool cabinet, where he kept his most important equipment. If he was going to travel to other dimensions to save dying alien wolves, he would need his tools. After all, fixing impossible things was what he did best, and it seemed like the universe had much bigger repair jobs waiting for him. The scientists watched in confusion as Marcus began packing his mechanical equipment, and Comet prepared to open another wormhole. None of them understood that sometimes the most complex problems required the simplest solutions, and that a mechanic's practical wisdom could be worth more than all their advanced degrees combined. Marcus packed his essential tools into a modified backpack, while Comet prepared to open their first dimensional portal. The wolf had explained that they would need to visit at least 6 different dimensions to find and treat the remaining infected members of his pack. Each dimension had different physical laws, which meant Marcus would need to adapt his treatment methods for each location. The first portal opened with a sound like distant thunder and revealed a world where everything seemed to be made of crystalline structures that pulsed with inner light. Comet stepped through first, and Marcus followed, carrying his equipment and trying not to think about how far from home he was about to go. The crystal dimension was beautiful but alien in ways that made Marcus's head hurt if he looked too closely at the geometric patterns surrounding them. Gravity worked differently here, pulling in multiple directions at once, and the air tasted like metal and electricity. Comet moved confidently through the strange landscape, leading Marcus toward a distant spire of blue crystal. Inside the spire, they found another Starlight wolf named Nova, who was in worse condition than Comet had been. The parasites had been feeding on her for months, and she was barely conscious when they arrived. Her fur had turned completely gray, and the starlight patterns that should have decorated her coat were dim and fading. Marcus set up his equipment quickly while Comet used his telepathic abilities to communicate with Nova and keep her calm. The parasites in this dimension had adapted to the crystal environment and were using the ambient energy from the crystalline structures to boost their feeding rate. Marcus had to modify his electromagnetic generators to account for the interference from the surrounding crystals. The treatment took 6 hours because the parasites had become much stronger by feeding on crystal energy. Marcus had to constantly adjust his equipment as the parasites tried to use the crystal formations to escape his electromagnetic fields. At one point, the entire spire began to resonate with his device's frequency, and Marcus worried that he might bring the whole structure down. When the treatment was finally complete, Nova transformed just as dramatically as Comet had. Her fur exploded into brilliant white light decorated with patterns that looked like flowing lava made of stars. She was larger than Comet, and when she stood up, her presence filled the crystal chamber with warmth and energy that made the walls sing with harmonic vibrations. Nova thanked Marcus in the same telepathic way that Comet did, but her mental voice was deeper and older. She explained that she was Comet's aunt and had been guarding the crystal dimension's connection to the main dimensional network when the parasites attacked. With her abilities restored, she could once again maintain the barriers that kept hostile entities from using this world as a gateway. The second dimension they visited was a place of eternal storms where lightning creatures danced through clouds that stretched from horizon to horizon. Here they found Storm, a young male starlight wolf who had been struck by parasitic lightning during a battle with the hostile entities. The parasites in this dimension were made of pure energy and could only be treated using Marcus's heat therapy combined to controlled electrical discharges. Marcus nearly got struck by lightning 3 times while treating Storm a Comet, and Nova worked together to create protective energy fields around him. The storm dimension was exhausting and dangerous, but Storm's recovery was the fastest they had seen. As soon as the energy parasites were neutralized, Storm's natural connection to the electrical storms was restored, and he began to glow with the same lightning that filled the sky. Their third stop was a desert dimension where sand moved like water, and time flowed at different speeds in different locations. The infected wolf here was called Dust, and she had been partially phased out of normal reality by parasites that existed in multiple time streams simultaneously. Marcus had to build a temporal stabilization device using components from his navigation equipment to lock Dust into a single time flow long enough for treatment. The temporal parasites were the most difficult ones Marcus had encountered because they kept shifting between past and future states to avoid his electromagnetic fields. He solved the problem by creating a treatment sequence that operated across multiple time periods simultaneously. The device looked like organized chaos with wires and components that seemed to exist in several different moments at once. Dust's recovery was spectacular even by Starlight Wolf standards. When the temporal parasites were finally eliminated, she became synchronized with all possible versions of herself across multiple timelines. Her fur showed patterns that changed constantly as different versions of her appeared and disappeared in the same space. She could see events that had not happened yet, and remember things that had occurred in alternate realities. The fourth dimension was an underwater realm where everything was made of flowing liquid light. The infected wolf Tide had been attacked by parasites that could swim through solid matter as easily as water. Marcus had to waterproof all his equipment and learn to work underwater, while surrounded by creatures that looked like living jewels swimming through the liquid light. Treating Tide required Marcus to understand how his electromagnetic fields would behave in a medium that was part water and part energy. The parasites here moved like schools of fish constantly changing direction to avoid capture. Marcus finally succeeded by creating a net of intersecting electromagnetic beams that herded the parasites into collection points, where they could be extracted. When Tide was healed, her transformation turned the entire underwater realm into a light show that could be seen from other dimensions. Patterns of flowing energy spread out from her position like ripples on a pond carrying healing energy to damaged areas of the liquid light environment. Fish made of pure light began to follow her as she swam, celebrating her return to health. The fifth dimension was the strangest, yet a place where thoughts had. Physical form and emotions could be touched and moved like objects. The infected wolf mind had been attacked by parasites that fed on memories and dreams. Marcus had to learn to think his tools into existence and use mental energy to power his equipment instead of electricity. Working in the thought dimension required Marcus to maintain perfect concentration because any stray thoughts would immediately become real and interfere with his work. The parasites here were memories of the hostile entities that had implanted themselves into Mind's consciousness. Marcus had to literally fight his way through nightmares and dark thoughts to reach the infection sites. Mind's healing was the most emotional experience Marcus had ever been through. As the memory parasites were destroyed, Mind's suppressed experiences came flooding back, including telepathic recordings of the battles against the hostile entities. Marcus experienced flashes of the war from a Starlight wolf's perspective and finally understood the scope of what they were fighting against. The final dimension was a void space where stars were being born from pure darkness. Here they found Elder, the oldest of Comet's pack, who had been guarding the most important dimensional crossing when she was infected. Elder's condition was critical because the parasites had been feeding on her for over a year and had begun to reproduce inside her body, creating new generations of increasingly powerful parasites. Marcus realized that his standard treatment methods would not work on Elder because the parasites had evolved beyond his ability to disrupt them individually. Instead, he would need to create a treatment that could eliminate multiple generations of parasites simultaneously while supporting Elder's weakened life systems. Working with all 5 recovered wolves, Marcus built his most complex device yet. It combined elements from every treatment he had developed plus new techniques that used the unique abilities of each pack member. Comet provided dimensional energy, Nova contributed crystal harmonics, Storm added electrical control, Dust managed tempo synchronization, Tide supplied liquid light flow, and Mind projected the necessary thought patterns. The treatment of Elder took 12 hours and required all 6 wolves working together in perfect coordination. Marcus found himself connected to their group telepathic network, experiencing the shared consciousness of the pack as they fought to save their eldest member. The experience was overwhelming, but it also gave Marcus insights into how the Starlight Wolves really functioned as guardians of reality itself. When Elder was finally healed, her transformation was unlike anything Marcus had witnessed before. She did not just recover her abilities, but seemed to transcend them, becoming a living embodiment of the cosmic forces that held the dimensions together. Her presence alone began repairing damage that the hostile entities had done to the dimensional barriers over many years of warfare. Elder looked at Marcus with eyes that contained entire galaxies and spoke to him not just telepathically, but through direct transfer of knowledge and understanding. She showed him that the hostile entities were not from any normal dimension, but from spaces between realities where nothing should exist. They fed on the collapse of order reality and sought to drag all dimensions into the chaos void where they originated. Marcus finally understood why his mechanical approach had been so successful. The parasites were not really alive in any biological sense, but were fragments of anti-reality that functioned like corrupted programs in a cosmic computer system. His engineering skills had allowed him to debug the universal operating system in ways that biological medicine never could. The pack was complete again and the dimensional barriers were secure, but Elder warned Marcus that this was only the beginning. The hostile entities would continue to send new attacks, and there were other species across the galaxy that served as reality guardians who might need similar help. Marcus had become something unprecedented mechanic who could repair the fundamental structures of existence itself. Marcus returned to Port Haven Station with 6 healthy Starlight wolves and a completely different understanding of his place in the universe. The simple mechanic who had once struggled to pay rent for his small repair shop was now the only person in the galaxy who could heal dimensional guardians using modified ship parts and engineering principles. News of their success had spread throughout the galactic community during their absence. When Marcus and the wolf pack emerged from the dimensional portal in his shop, they found representatives from dozens of different species waiting for them. The shop was crowded with alien dignitary scientists and military officers, all wanting to understand how a human mechanic had solved problems that their best experts could not even comprehend. Elder spoke telepathically to the assembled crowd, explaining that Marcus had developed the first effective treatment for parasitic attacks from void entities. She described how his mechanical approach treated the parasites as corrupted code in reality's operating system rather than biological organisms. The concept was so revolutionary that most of the alien scientists struggled to understand it. Dr. Park pushed the crowd and demanded to examine Marcus's equipment and treatment records. She insisted that his methods needed to be studied and replicated by trained professionals before they could be considered scientifically valid. Marcus just smiled and continued cleaning his tools while Comet explained telepathically that the treatments only worked when performed by someone who thought like Marcus did. Over the following weeks, more infected creatures were brought to Port Haven from across the galaxy. The void entities had been attacking reality guardians of many different species, including crystal singers from the mineral world's telepathic flowers from the garden dimensions and energy beings that lived inside dying stars. Each species required different treatment approaches, but all responded to Marcus's fundamental principle of treating void parasites as mechanical rather than biological problems. Marcus found himself training other humans in his techniques because aliens seemed unable to adapt their thinking to his mechanical approach. The humans he taught were all engineers, mechanics, and technicians who understood systems and repair work. They learned to see infected guardians as broken machines that needed debugging rather than sick animals that needed medicine. The training program started small with just 5 human mechanics working out of Marcus's shop, but it grew rapidly as word spread about their success rate. Within 3 months, Marcus had established the first academy for reality mechanics in an abandoned warehouse section of Port Haven. The academy trained humans from across the galaxy in the art of fixing fundamental problems with existence itself. Comet became Marcus's partner in developing new treatment methods for different types of void infections. The wolf's telepathic abilities allowed him to communicate with infected guardians and understand exactly how the parasites were affecting their dimensional abilities. Marcus would then design mechanical solutions to disrupt the parasitic processes and restore normal function. The partnership between human mechanics and Starlight wolves proved incredibly effective. The wolves could detect void parasites across multiple dimensions, while the humans could build devices to eliminate them. Together they formed teams that could respond to parasitic attacks anywhere in the known universe within hours of detection. Elder established a new pack structure that included humans as honorary pack members. Marcus was given the title of Alpha Mechanic and granted access to the Wolves' dimensional transportation network. This allowed him to travel instantly to any location where reality guardians needed help regardless of how far away it was from normal space. The void entities responded to these successes by changing their tactics. Instead of sending simple parasites, they began deploying more complex attacks, including reality viruses that could corrupt entire dimensional sectors and logic bombs that would explode when guardians tried to use their abilities. Marcus had to constantly develop new countermeasures to stay ahead of the evolving threats. One of the most dangerous attacks came when the void entities tried to infect Earth's reality anchor points. Earth was not considered an important world by most galactic civilizations, but it served as a stabilization point for several major dimensional networks. If the planet's anchor points were corrupted, it could cause cascade failures across multiple realities. Marcus and his team of reality mechanics arrived on Earth to find the planet's natural guardians already partially infected. These guardians were not exotic creatures like Starlight wolves, but ordinary animals that had been unknowingly maintaining reality stability for millions of years. Whales, dolphins, certain bird species, and even some insects were all serving as biological processors for Earth's dimensional anchor system. Treating infected Earth animals required Marcus to develop his most subtle techniques yet. The animals could not survive the intense electromagnetic treatments that worked on cosmic guardians, so Marcus had to create gentler methods that worked with the creature's natural biology rather than overwhelming it. The project took 6 months and required training veterinarians and wildlife biologists in reality mechanics principles. Marcus learned that every planet with intelligent life had similar hidden guardian systems, and that the void entities had been systematically attacking these systems for thousands of years. Most civilizations never realized their guardian animals were infected until their reality anchors failed completely. Success on Earth led to Marcus being invited to help other worlds protect their guardian species. He traveled to ocean worlds where reality was maintained by intelligent corals to forest planets where the trees themselves served as dimensional processors, and to gas giants where flying creatures live in the upper atmosphere while maintaining reality stability in the lower dimensions. Each world taught Marcus something new about how reality worked and how it could be repaired when damaged. He began to understand that the universe was not just a collection of stars and planets, but a vast interconnected machine that required constant maintenance to continue functioning. The void entities were essentially a cosmic computer virus trying to crash the universal operating system. As Marcus's reputation grew, he attracted the attention of ancient civilizations that had been fighting the void entities for millions of years. These elder races had developed their own methods for dealing with parasitic attacks, but had never achieved the success rate that Marcus's teams consistently delivered. The Crystalline Collective invited Marcus to their home dimension where reality was stored in living crystal matrices that could be directly programmed and repaired. The Collective had been maintaining these reality crystals for eons, but void infections were causing increasing numbers of system failures. Marcus's mechanical approach proved perfect for debugging crystalline reality code. The Temporal Authority recruited Marcus to help repair damage to the timeline itself. The void entities have been inserting paradox parasites into key historical events, causing reality branches that should not exist. Marcus learned to build devices that could isolate and remove temporal infections while preserving the correct flow of causality. Even the cosmic engineers who had built many of the universe's fundamental structures millions of years ago acknowledged that Marcus's methods were superior to their own ancient techniques. They offered to share technology that could enhance his reality repair abilities, but Marcus preferred to stick with simple tools and principles that any human mechanic could understand and use. The Academy for Reality Mechanics expanded to include branch campuses on hundreds of worlds. Human mechanics became the most sought-after specialists in the galaxy for any problem involving fundamental reality maintenance. Other species began sending their brightest students to learn from humans, even though they had previously considered human technology primitive. Marcus established standardized training programs and certification processes to ensure that reality mechanics maintained consistent quality across the galaxy. The basic principles were simple enough for any competent mechanic to learn, but the applications required creativity and intuitive understanding that seemed to come naturally to humans. The void entities made one final massive attack, attempting to corrupt the central reality processing cores that maintain existence across multiple galactic clusters. The attack was coordinated across thousands of dimensions simultaneously and threatened to collapse large sections of the universe into non-existence. Marcus coordinated the defense using every reality mechanic team in the galaxy. The battle lasted for weeks and required innovations in dimensional engineering that pushed human mechanical thinking to its absolute limits. Teams of mechanics worked around the clock building devices to counter void weapons that operated on principles beyond normal physics. The turning point came when Marcus realized that the void entities were not actually trying to destroy reality, but to rewrite it according to their own specifications. They wanted to turn the universe into a place where chaos and non-existence were the natural states, and where order reality could only exist in small, isolated pockets under their control. Understanding the void entity's true goal allowed Marcus to develop countermeasures that did not just eliminate their parasites, but actively reinforce the universe's natural tendency toward order and stability. The final device he built was not a weapon, but a cosmic debugging program that identified and corrected fundamental errors in reality's source code. When the Great Void Attack was finally defeated, the universe had been permanently strengthened against future incursions. The reality anchor points were more stable, the dimensional barriers were reinforced, and the guardian species across thousands of worlds had been immunized against parasitic infections. Marcus returned to Port Haven Station as the most respected problem solver in galactic history, but he was still the same practical mechanic who preferred simple solutions to complex problems. His small repair shop had become the headquarters for an organization that maintained the fundamental stability of existence itself. Comet remained his constant companion and partner in developing new techniques for reality maintenance. The Starlight wolf had grown from a dying pup into a cosmic guardian whose abilities now spanned multiple dimensions, but he still enjoyed sleeping on the warm spot near Marcus's workbench, just like any ordinary dog. The Academy continued to train new generations of reality mechanics, while Marcus worked on his memoirs documenting the principles and techniques that had saved the universe. He wrote in simple language that any mechanic could understand, because he believed that the most important discoveries should be accessible to ordinary people. Years later, when young mechanics asked Marcus how he had discovered that void parasites could be treated as mechanical problems rather than biological ones, he would just smile and point his tools. The answer was simple for anyone willing to see it. Everything in the universe was just a machine, and any machine could be fixed if you understood how it was supposed to work. The universe was running smoothly again, and Marcus had found his true calling as a cosmic mechanic who kept reality itself in perfect working order.